Good afternoon. Welcome to the Capital Fund Green Physical Needs Assessment webcast for today. My name is Bill Thorson. I will be your host. To my left is Bruce Ryder of the Public Housing Office of Capital Improvements. He is the lead on the Green Physical Needs Assessment implementation. Bruce, have you got a few words for us?
I do have a few words. Thank you, Bill. Good afternoon and good morning to those that are joining us from the West, and happy spring to everybody. I guess we all have spring.
I like spring.
We like spring. Welcome to this continuation of the training and orientation on HUD's new Physical Needs Assessment and Energy Audit. For those of you that may be joining us for the first time, our first session was broadcast on January the 10th. It is available on the HUD.gov video archive page, the page you went to get here. And the slides from that session are now posted on our Physical Needs Assessment webpage at HUD.gov. Likewise, this session will be posted on HUD.gov in a few days. Since the last session, we have all learned that we will be facing cuts brought on by the sequester. For those of you who don't hang on every moment of and every movement of Congress, and I do envy you that do not do that, the Senate yesterday passed a bill, and I understand the House just a few minutes ago passed the same bill that extends the continuing resolution to the end of this fiscal year, funding us at last year's level, but retaining the sequester cuts. So now we have some budget clarity, at least for the remaining 6 months of this fiscal year. And so you've been asking about the impact of the sequester on the implementation schedule for this PNA project. The driver of the implementation schedule is really the pace of the rulemaking process. And until there is a published rule, we really don't have an implementation schedule. So it's a little premature to be extending a schedule that doesn't yet exist. The rule processing schedule remains in a very unpredictable place. And as long as that has been the case, we have been reporting to you the earliest possible implementation commencement dates as examples, so that you would have some visibility as much as we are able to provide. As of today, we can tell you that there is no possibility that the rule will be implemented this fiscal year. The earliest possible first due date that we will be using as an example today is December 1st for those PHAs with a fiscal year end of March 31st. This is an example of the timing that would occur if all the rulemaking steps occurred seamlessly, which has not been the case for almost a year. So with this or any other rule. So just, these dates, like I say, are the earliest possible if everything goes perfectly.
And we'll talk about the details
Yes.
of that a little bit later.
So the greatest likelihood for the PNA implementation is that it will commence well into next fiscal year, which is not to say you can't be starting or can't be attending this kind of training and becoming familiar with it. One thing that you can be sure of is that HUD will be implementing a PNA requirement and an energy audit standards. We continue to encourage you to remain engaged in this process and to consider the new procedures and any of the required PNA or any energy audit work that you may have to be doing, or that you might have to do before the final rule comes out. Each PHA is different. Circumstances are different. Some of you may find it useful to get going with this. Others of you may want to wait until the final rule comes out. But at this point in time, you do have really a lot of flexibility in terms of determining your own scheduling for addressing this before the rule imposes a time frame. I have a program note for today's session, just in case you missed it. In the previous session, in the demonstration portion, a lot of folks couldn't see it very well. It was not very legible, and that's just a limitation of this broadcast format. So for those of you that did see that session, you can, again, look at it on the web page, and that resolution is corrected there, so you can see it much more clearly now in the archived version. But to address that in this session, later on in the session, and the login information is on your the March 13th memo for this session, we'll switch over to a WebEx format, which would require you to leave this session, log on to a website, And in that way, you will see a computer screen directly, and the demonstration portion of the tool will be a lot more clearly seen. So just keep an eye out on that. We will put on the screen the login information when we get close to that time, but just bear in mind that we'll be doing that probably around 2:30 time frame. So with that, Bill, please continue.
Okay, thanks, Bruce. Appreciate it. Let's talk just a couple of seconds in terms of what's coming up over the next 3 hours. We'll have a brief overview in terms of where we're going, and we'll talk a little bit about the rules that Bruce talked about, and then we'll talk some more on the implementation of the whole program. We'll take a 5-minute break at that juncture. After the break, we'll have some questions and answers. Then we want to have a session about talking about what can you do to get ready. Bruce just mentioned the fact that we're somewhat delayed. It's still coming, you can be assured of that. And there's a lot of work that we have to do to get ready for doing the P&A, and you'll see more about that as we get further into the broadcast. So I would encourage you not to get complacent about preparing yourself for the GPNA, and that's what we'll talk about for that section. Then we'll take another little break, and then we're going to switch over, as Bruce was mentioning, to the WebEx, where we'll give you a better use of the electronics, and we'll do a demonstration on the GPNA and the energy audit, so we can give you a better sense of what this is all about. We'll take a last break, and then we'll have questions and answers for about 20 minutes. So that's the overview in terms of what we're going to cover for the next 3 hours. So if we'll go right into it, today, as Bruce mentioned, we had a session on January 10th that talked about the whole process. And what we're going to do today is build on that. We're going to provide you with more information than we did in January 10th. There's going to be a little bit of a review, but we're going to add to that. So you'll have a better sense of what the whole process is going to end up being and how you're going to be involved in it. We also, you'll notice from our PowerPoint slides, if you click there when you get on the web, it'll take you directly to our website where you can get more information about the GPNA, the Green Physical Needs Assessment, as well as the energy audit requirements. There's a lot of information there. There's the software, there's the user's guide, there's an explanation of the whole thing, there's the regulations, and so on and so forth. So a lot of information there for you. Now, talking about the rules. We've got more than just a couple of rules dealing with the capital fund. The capital fund started back in the olden days with the development of new public housing, and we sort of have an app for that, right? The app is 24 CFR 941, that's the regulation. So we have a separate set of regulations for the development of new public housing, whether it's construction or acquisition with or without rehab. As you get into the 60s, we begin to provide modernization funding to housing authorities through the Comprehensive Improvement Assistance Program, also known as CAP. That was an application-based program. All housing authorities applied. As we get into the 90s, we have the Comprehensive Grant Program. And that was for housing authorities with 250 or more units. Smaller housing authorities still stayed on CAP, and our app for that is 24 CFR 968. I mention this because it's important. When we get to the whole notion of the capital fund, we do have a capital fund rule. It's at 24 CFR 905. That's our app for the capital fund. The problem is that it only talks about the formula, the eligible expenses, obligations and expenditures, as well as the capital fund financing program. It doesn't cover such things as environmental requirements, accessibility requirements, other types of things like fiscal closeout. All of that stuff is still in 24 CFR 968. So what HUD has said is that you got to follow 968 unless it's otherwise covered in 905, which is sort of confusing at this juncture. Let me hold that aside for a second to mention that we have two additional rules related to the capital fund. One is 24 CFR 903, which is your PHA plan regulations. And the PHA plan includes both your capital fund 5-year action plan and your capital fund annual statement and performance and evaluation review. So that's tied into the capital fund, but there's a separate rule for it. We also have another rule, 24 CFR 965. I generally describe it as the general provisions, one of which is a requirement that once every 5 years, housing authorities have an energy audit, and you incorporate cost-effective energy conservation measures if you've got the money to do so. So the whole notion of energy audits is important when you think about the notion of doing a physical needs assessment, because a lot of us are on asset-based management, right? Asset-based management, your expenses must be less than your income. And so if your expenses must be less than your income, you need to be thinking about physical improvements that will reduce your expenses, one of which, one of the bigger expense items is, guess what? Energy consumptions. And so you need to be thinking about this whole issue of energy and physical needs assessment at the same time and sequentially. So those are 5 sets of regulations. So how is all this going to pull together? Bruce talked about a proposed rule. We actually have 3 of them when you get right down to it. So what are they? First rule is an amendment which gets rid of 941, gets rid of 968, and consolidates everything into 905, so we have one consolidated rule. Development requirements go in there. The old discussion about CAP and comp grant goes out because that's all obsolete now. We incorporate the Uniform Act requirements. We incorporate environmental requirements. We incorporate 504, all of those types of things. So now we have a consolidated rule. As a part of that consolidated rule, we also published a second proposed rule discussing the requirement to do a physical needs assessment in more detail, because we wanted to have more of a discussion with our partners in the industry so we could talk through the requirement and make sure we listened to you and we got issues that were important to you taken care of. Then the third piece is a proposed rule which moves the requirement for the energy audits from 965 into the capital fund. This way we're going to have an integrated rule that covers everything and it's going to be up to date. So that's what the game plan is, and that's what we're waiting for right now, is for all of these things to be finalized within the system, the incubation period, and then have the birth of the new capital fund program. So let's talk just a little bit about the requirements of the Green Physical Needs Assessment. All housing authorities have to have one, regardless of size. Remember I mentioned the CAP and the comp grant and that sort of thing. Doesn't matter. Everybody needs one. Your GPNAs are going to be project-based because we're focusing on asset-based management. You need to know what the costs are to operate a public housing project. As a part of operating a public housing project, you got to know what your physical improvements are. So we want to have project-based physical needs assessments. The other thing we want to emphasize is that we don't want to just look at what the costs are right now that we need. We want to look at costs over a 20-year period, because in 5 years, 10 years, we may need to replace a roof, and that's something we probably, as a property manager or as an executive, we want to know. So we're incorporating this life cycle concept into that whole practice. The GPNA will have to be done regardless of funding. I talk to a lot of housing authorities around the country and they say, I only get $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 in capital funds and my physical needs are well above that, so why do I even need to bother? Well, part of the answer to that question is we know we have a shortage of funds. We need to find out what our total needs are so that we can then make strategic decisions in terms of what do we want to do with our portfolio. The physical needs assessment and the energy audit are going to be done in conjunction with your PHA plan. This is going to provide you with the data to be able to make the decisions on mission, goals, and those types of things in terms of being able to prioritize and decide what you ultimately want to do with your inventory, given the state of funding. It's going to be a decision for you, specifically a decision for you. So, having said that, the Green Physical Needs Assessment is going to be an eligible cost under the capital fund. In addition, the reg says housing authorities will do a Green Physical Needs Assessment in the form and manner prescribed by HUD. And specifically what it says is that you're going to use the Green Physical Needs Assessment software, and it's often referred to as a GPNA tool, to collect the data and provide it to HUD. It's got to be provided in electronic form. So those are some of the basic things in terms of the GPNA. Bruce talked a little bit a couple minutes ago about the actual implementation of it. The way the proposed reg was set up, the intent was that, and this one you have to pay attention to because it's a little dicey. The first P&A will be due 120 days after the effective date of the rule. Normally, when a rule is published as a final rule, you're given 30 days for it to become effective. And so it would be 120 days after that, or a total of 150 days, but let's stick with 120. From there, once the rule itself is effective, 120 days after the effective date of the rule, then your P&As will be due 120 days prior to the end of your fiscal year. Now, if you've already got P&As that have been done within the last 2 years and they meet the requirements of the rule, not a problem, we can use the data. So let's take a look at how this 120 days before the end of your fiscal year will pan out. So if you are a March 31st housing authority, your P&A will be due on December 1st. If you're a June 30th housing authority, your P&A will be due on March 2nd. If you're a September 30th housing authority, your P&A will be due to HUD on June 2nd. If you're a December 31st housing authority, your P&A will be due to be submitted to HUD on September 1st. This table that you're looking at now is not going to change. The only question is, when is the effective date of the rule and when is the 120 days going to kick in? So let's take an example, and this is purely an example. This is not when the rule is coming out, but just as an example, if the rule was published on April 7th, 2013, remember I said you have to have 30 days for it to become effective. So it becomes effective on May 7th, 2013. 120 days from May 7th, 2013 is September 4th. So the question is, of that table, which housing authorities are due to be submitted to HUD after September 4th? And if you remember from the table, it'll be the March 31st housing authorities that'll be due on 12/1. So that's at the very, very earliest, which I think Bruce indicated the likelihood of it becoming effective on becoming published on April 7th is probably slim to none at this juncture. So we know that the first P&As are going to be due sometime in 2014. As we mentioned before, don't get complacent about that fact, because there's a lot of work that you have to go through in order to be ready to submit the GPNA to HUD. It's like when I talk to people about the PHA plan. That's due 75 days before the beginning of your fiscal year. Can you start 30 days before that? No, you probably have to start 6 to 9 months ahead of that in order to be ready on time. And so now is the time to get ready and get started. So when you talk about the GPNA, HUD is going to provide the software, as I mentioned before. It's otherwise known as a GPNA tool, and it produces reports for you. It doesn't just collect data, it produces reports of various types. I mentioned before that it'll be done in conjunction with the energy audit. And the energy audit, energy conservation measures from your energy audit will be incorporated inside the GPNA software. If you've got energy audits that were done within the last 3 years and were done in accordance with the energy audit reg that's going to be published, then you won't have to redo it over again. So we're not looking to have a lot of stuff regurgitated over and over again. This way it'll help facilitate this whole thing. But you got to think about those dates and how old your any existing P&As that you've got done or energy audits are done as we get into the effective date of the final rule. After you complete the GPNA, you will have a data extract that's provided inside the tool that you will upload to HUD, and we'll talk more about that as we get into the implementation. When you finish your GPNA, you complete it, you upload certain data to HUD that it's looking for based on the tool. At that juncture, you will redo your P&A once every 5 years in conjunction with your PHA plan. In the interim, you will do annual updates. So what's the annual update involved? Well, let's say your GPNA had 5 items, and you did the GPNA in 2013. In 2014, you may just have done 1 item, which is a roof on Bill Thorson homes. Your annual update's only going to have to include the roof on Bill Thorson homes. That's all it is. And I think we also asked for funding sources so we know where the money comes from. So you do a GPNA once every 5 years. You'll have an annual update just for the work that was done during that year. Each year you'll have an annual update. And as I mentioned, you'll be doing this in conjunction with your 5-year plan, because it's going to provide you with the data that you need to make strategic decisions, both short-term and long-term. What am I going to do with my 2013 capital funds? What am I going to do with my inventory long-term? Am I going to keep it? Am I going to get rid of it? So you need to be using this GPNA in conjunction with that strategic planning process that you've got in place right now. It'll also be used to enter data into the Energy Performance Information Center, otherwise known as EPIC. Most of you are familiar with that. We've been doing that for, what, about a year now?
Some form of it, yes.
Some form of it. Now, pay attention, really close attention. The software for the GPNA relies on a data download from the PIC building and unit data characteristics. The PIC building and unit data characteristics must be correct, because otherwise it'll reject. So we're going to have that available. It's going to be refreshed about every 2 to 3 weeks. You're going to send an email to PHAs@HUD.gov, and you're going to request your data files to be sent directly to you. We're working on building an automated link so you don't have to do the email. So you'll be able to download the PIC building and unit data characteristics directly into the software. But for the time being, until that's done, you go by email to PHAs@HUD.gov, request your PIC data, and that'll be provided to you in a relatively short period of time. As I mentioned before, the PIC data has to be accurate, because if you download PIC building and unit data characteristics and you change your building and unit data characteristics in the software and you upload it, it's going to be rejected. And so we got to make sure that that's sequenced and done correctly. If you need to make changes, wait until after you re-upload your GPNA to HUD. Then not a problem. We always want accurate data in PIC. But when we're talking about this transition period between when you download and then you upload, you got to make sure that there's no changes. Another important factor that you need to take into consideration is the fact that the software requires you to put cost data in it in order to calculate both backlog and accrual costs. So that's going to require you to purchase a commercial cost indices off of the open market if you don't already have it. Maybe you have an architectural and engineering firm on board and they have cost estimating software. That's fine, we don't care. It's going to be your choice. And a lot of what you see about the GPNA is going to be your choice. We're providing the parameters for how that's going to be done. We've got the software and all the data fields and all that stuff. But the bulk of it is a decision-making process on your part in terms of how you want to be able to do this within some general parameters that are provided. In addition to that, this tool is to be used by you to help you make those strategic decisions. So that's an important point as you get through this whole discussion about the GPNA. So you're going to be purchasing commercial cost data to put into the cost library inside the GPNA tool. This is going to be probably very staff intensive the first year because of all of the data that has to be collected and put in there. Once you've done that the first year, then as you get into subsequent years, the data can be carried over, and so it'll be much easier. But the first year, it's going to require some time. We'll get through it. It's just going to require a little bit of time and planning on your part so you can make sure that you'll be ready when it comes time for you to make your submission to HUD, because we want that to be done on time. in addition to the software, cost estimating software, you're going to have to do architectural takeoffs. So in order to calculate how much it costs to replace a roof, we got to know how many square feet of roof area you got, right? We got to know how much floor tile you got in the kitchens and the bathroom, windows, things like that. So you need to be able to collect all that data ahead of time. That takes time. You need to be able to calculate the effective useful life of any remaining building component. That's an important issue in terms of making decisions about when things will be replaced. We also have the remaining useful life of building components that get put into the cost library, as well as the replacement cost data. So, having said that, general parameters, who can do the GPNA? We have a list in the regs, and we mentioned it in our earlier presentations, what the qualifications are. But you've got to be experienced in assessments of residential building structures. You have to have about 5 years of this. You got to know local codes, those sorts of things. And you can refer back to our other training material on that. The key in terms of who does it is qualifications. If your staff has the qualifications and you want them to do it, that's fine, not a problem. If you decide you want to contract it out because for whatever reason, you don't have the staff, you don't have the time, you don't have the expertise, or the fact that this first year is going to be staff intensive, you can do that as well. It's strictly up to you so long as the staff that do it meet the qualifications. Another point relative to the GPNA is that when the GPNA is done, you'll have to make the GPNA results available to the residents and the resident advisory board at the time you submit it to HUD. So it's an informational sharing activity for the housing authority. So those are general issues relative to the green physical needs assessment. Let's talk just a little bit about the energy audit. The old energy audit requirements fundamentally said you'll do one, and you'll incorporate cost-effective energy conservation measures. The new energy audit requirements are more detailed, more standardized, so we'll make sure we get similar products. It's very similar to the Level 2 ASHRAE, American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers audit. So if you're familiar with that, then I think you've got it pretty well locked down. So as I mentioned, it will provide more standardization. It'll provide cost-effective energy conservation measures. I mentioned before that by integrating this whole notion of the energy audit into the physical needs assessment, you can begin thinking about physical improvements that will reduce your operating costs. So by doing that integration, you'll be killing two birds with one stone, reducing your backlog and reducing your operating costs, which is an important aspect of property management as well as asset-based management. Now, we do not have software or a format to do the energy audit. We've outlined, and there's more discussion here in a couple minutes, about what goes into the energy audit, but we have no format. So you collect the audit from yourself or the contractor based on the ASHRAE Level 2 type of energy audit, and you should be fine. The energy audit does not require you to incorporate any specific energy conservation measures unless it's otherwise required by state or local or other statute. Mentioned before the whole notion of this integration of utility management with capital planning so that we're able to reduce our operating cost. For that reason, we're going to be doing the energy audit in conjunction with the physical needs assessment. And that's going to be incorporated into the software because there's a section on sustainability in the software that's going to collect data from your energy audit. The energy audit itself is not required to be submitted to HUD. It is subject to HUD review, but you keep it in the files. And then you use the data to put the data into the GPNA software in the sustainability section. I mentioned this before, the new energy audit is not going to be required if you've already got one that's less than 3 years old and meets the standard of the new energy audit rule. In addition, we would not require housing authorities to do an energy audit on any project that is approved by the Special Application Center for demolition or disposition. So there's no point in doing an energy audit once you hit that point. So the energy audit is also going to be on a project by project basis, project AMP basis. It'll be performed not less than once every 5 years. So you do a PHA plan once every 5 years. Before you do a PHA plan, you're going to do a physical needs assessment and you're going to do an energy audit. And both of the energy audit and the physical needs assessment is going to provide you with a basis for doing your 5-year PHA plan. And these requirements are going to continue on. The energy audit is going to require that you identify the projected costs, the savings, payback periods related to a variety of energy conservation measures. I've talked about ECMs and energy conservation measures. What are they? It's essentially any type of activity that's going to reduce your utility or energy consumption, including water consumption. The energy audit may also include green measures, and green measures don't necessarily reduce energy. They're good for the environment, like using, what's the phrase, low...
VOC?
Yeah, right. Volatile chemicals, right. So that's a good green measure. I think when you use, for example, bamboo for the flooring, that's considered like a renewable source. Right. And so that's not saving energy, but it's good for the environment. So those are the types of things that you want to incorporate into your energy audit. The energy audit is broken down essentially in terms of ECMs into two types. The core ECM, which is those things that have a proven track record of reducing energy and water consumption. Those are things like the building envelope, like insulation, the heating and cooling and ventilation systems, water conservation, power lighting systems and controls, Energy Star appliances for your appliances. So you're going to need to be looking at Energy Star anytime you replace appliances. So you have core energy conservation measures that have a proven track record. You also have advanced energy conservation measures, and those are the more difficult things to try and accomplish, like fuel conversions, technology conversions like energy management systems, energy generating solar technologies like solar, geothermal. I was just back from Illinois, and I happened to, because I had to drive quite a while, on the back of the state map that I got at the rest area, guess what's on? Windmills. And I'm seeing windmills all over the country. Could be not only reducing energy, but generating energy for the housing authority. So those are becoming more and more popular. So though you have the core ECMs that reduce consumption, and you have advanced ECMs that are more challenging to try and effectuate. In the old energy audit rule, it talked about cost-effective energy conservation measures which had a payback of, I believe it was about 7 years. This rule breaks it down between 5 years and less, 10 years, 5 years and 10 years, and then greater than 10 years. By breaking it up like this, it gives you a better sense of which are the quick paybacks and which are the long paybacks. So it gives you a sense of priority to be able to make decisions on which ECMs that you want to use. In terms of getting ready to do the GPNA and energy audit, if you go to the HUD GPNA website, we've got a lot of material on there. We have the software, we have the user's guide. We also have the frequently asked questions, of which there are quite a bit, and we're adding to them almost every day. As you come in and ask questions and we respond to them, we'll incorporate those as well. I mentioned we had the software. We also have available these webcasts. The January 10th is on the HUD Webcast website, and this one will be there as well, so that you can begin looking at these at your leisure to get a sense of what it's all about. So, having said that, let's begin to talk about the implementation of the GPNA itself. So, we talked about the requirements of the regs and all that good stuff. HUD has contracted with a firm Econometrica Incorporated to support this whole effort. Econometrica will provide both the HUD headquarters and the field office and the housing authorities and GPNA providers with technical assistance in terms of using the GPNA software, the tool, as well as the requirements for the energy audit, but it's going to be through the field offices, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. Econometrica is also providing training on the GPNA and the energy audit requirements. We've had several sessions so far. We've had one live, and we're having the training session today. Econometrica, as I mentioned, has done the January 10th and the February 27th seminars. We did a seminar on February 6th as well, and I think this is the last one we've got scheduled in this series right now. So we're doing that. We're also providing web-based technical assistance with ongoing frequently asked questions. We're also providing quality control reviews of the physical needs assessments as they begin to get implemented, and we will be analyzing the GPNAs when they come in to provide an overall quality control, just to get a sense of issues that are coming up. Also, we're providing issue resolution and a tracking system so that as issues come up and housing authorities and field offices need assistance, we'll track those, make sure that they get answered in a timely fashion. So we'll talk a little bit more about quality assurance a little bit later. So once the energy audit and the GPNA rules are published, we start working on moving forward. Now, some housing authorities have already started. I've talked to housing authorities around the country. I think we've already gotten submissions in through the website of completed GPNAs. So you've got some housing authorities have come in. Generally, we're going to have implementation in 3 phases. So the first thing you begin to do as you start looking at this stuff is you have questions, right? And the key, and I mentioned this before, the key will be if housing authorities or GPNA providers have questions, all questions are to be directed to the field offices. Let me repeat this. If you have questions, direct your questions to the field offices, whether it's from the housing authorities or the GPNA providers. The field office, based on the resources it has available to it and its expertise, they'll look at the website, they'll look at the user's guide, they'll look at the frequently asked questions, look at the regulations. Hopefully they'll be able to answer the question and get back to you shortly. Generally, we want to be able to respond within 3 days, understanding that things are coming in and going out and people are on travel. If the field office can't answer the question, we have a link, an email address for them to go to. They will come to us, they will ask the question, we will prepare a response, coordinate it with HUD, and make sure that that response gets out ideally within a 3-day period. And as you can see here, we're trying to get responses out as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, we do not have a 1-800 number as a part of this process. So in case you were thinking about that, you need to be able to focus on this whole email traffic that we were talking about before. So the second part of it is you've already started asking your questions. From there, housing authorities will need to submit their GPNAs on time. And this is a slightly different rendition of the slide we had before. The dates are sort of rearranged a little bit, but you've got September, just to keep you off guard. They are the same dates. They're the same dates. It's just juggled around a little bit. So that if your housing authority is a September 30th fiscal year end, your GPNA is going to be due on June 2nd. If you're a December 31st housing authority, your GPNA is going to be due on September 1st. If you're a March 31st PHA, your GPNA will be due on December 1st. If you're a June 30th housing authority, your GPNA will be due on March 2nd. Those dates will not change. The only variable is when the regulations get published in the Federal Register, which will trigger a 30-day effective date, and then 120 days after that. From there, any due date that falls after that date is going to have the GPNA into HUD. So more about that as we go down through the process. So you've asked your questions, you've done your GPNA, you know when it's due. We just looked at that. So the housing authorities will then begin to start uploading their GPNAs to HUD. It's possible that we will have anomalies in the GPNAs as we begin to look at them. And those are going to be referred to your local field office for resolution. Field offices are going to take a look at them. We'll look at the different categories in terms of where there's an anomaly. The intent here is not to substitute HUD's judgment for that of the housing authorities, but instead the intent is to scrub the data to make sure that we have realistic data. So that if you're a housing authority and you've got units that were built in 1990 and your GPNA needs, your backlog needs are 200, 300% of total development cost limits, that's something that looks off. And we would want to go back and say, you know, did we get the decimal point in the wrong place? Something like that. Not to argue with the housing authority in terms of, well, you put a remaining useful life of 10 years, we think it's only 2. We don't want to get into that. We're looking at basic data quality because in the end, this is going to be a tool for you to use. If the data isn't relatively accurate, it's not going to help you in making your decisions. And that's an important part when you think about this whole issue of the GPNA. The purpose of this is to help you make strategic planning decisions. And you can't do it without data. And the more accurate the data is, the better decisions you'll be able to make. So, as the housing authority completes its GPNA, there is going to be in the software a section that will provide an XML export file that can be sent directly to HUD. There will be one XML export file for each development. Each development will have to be separately extracted and sent electronically to our email address, pnadata, D-A-T-A, at HUD.gov. So finish your GPNA, go into the software, go into the export file, generate the XML file, one per project, send it to pnadata at HUD.gov. I knew that. I should after 1 or 2 years here. So Econometrica is going to track all of the XML files that are going to be submitted because we're going to make sure everybody that's due on those due dates that we just talked about submits one. From there, it's going to go into a piece of software called the aggregator. And the aggregator is going to pull everything together. It's going to look at the data. Guess what the first thing it's going to look at? It's going to look at PIC building and unit data characteristics. And what do you think is going to happen if it doesn't match? It will reject your submission. That's why it's very important as a part of your prep work to make sure that the PIC data is in fact accurate. If the PIC data aggregator rejects your data, it'll go back to the housing authority. You'll have to work with the field office to reconcile the data, work with your PIC coach to make, because the whole issue is making sure that the PIC data matches. So having said that, if you correct your data, upload it to HUD, then it'll get resubmitted. If it's correct, we're done, and we're over at that juncture. So once the aggregator accepts the data, we'll do some initial screening. I mentioned before that we have benchmarks using cost data. There will be some human being looking at each one of these to get a reality check to make sure that this works right. And again, the whole idea is making sure we have reasonable data. In terms of the quality control that we have for this whole project, we have 3 levels. The first level of quality control involves anomalies where the field office and the PHA will work together to resolve the data anomalies. The 2 of them work together, they resolve it, we're done. The second level is where the issues that are brought up to the field office can't be resolved by the field office, and so we'll talk with them either by phone or email. Hopefully, we'll get it resolved at that juncture. Then the third level of QA, QC may require a more detailed documentation, looking at the underlying data, or something more extensive on the part of Econometrica. And we have teams of inspectors, assessors, architects, and engineers that are available to look into the technical issues here, so we can have make sure that we get good quality data. So those are the three basic pieces of the data anomalies that we look at. As we find data anomalies, particularly at the very beginning, it's not intended to be precise. I believe that one of our major benchmarks at the beginning, because we have no other data, is going to be the HUD total development cost limitations that we use for the development of public housing, and we use it for the capital fund as well in terms of reasonable costs. So it's going to be a general benchmark that we're going to use. As time goes on, we'll probably be collecting data from you folks out there, and so we'll have more credible and reliable data to use benchmarks. But particularly initially, when we send something out to you, if there's an anomaly and it looks right, then it's not a problem. For example, if your GPNA data shows 2 times the total development cost limit per project, and you're an older housing authority and you're a troubled housing authority, that's probably right, because you've got a lot of backlog, a lot of needs. Again, this isn't intended to be precise. It's intended to give benchmarks in terms of where you might have issues. If there's not really an issue, if it really requires that much in terms of backlog, that's fine. We just want another pair of eyes. Again, the whole notion here is to make sure we have good quality data to be able to make our decisions by. So we'll get better over time. So that's the overall general part of this. We'll get into getting ready for the GPNA in a couple of minutes. So at this juncture, I think we're probably ready for a 5-minute break. I know I could use one. I think yes. Bruce could as well. So at this juncture, we'll take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back, and then we'll get more into the you guys getting ready for the GPNA, and then we'll get into, after that, we'll get into the software demo.
And questions?
And we'll get questions, lots of them.
Next slide, you've got the address.
Oh, sorry about that, good thing. It's always good to have backup systems around. Right. We want you to ask questions. That's what we're here for. PHAPNA@HUD.gov. You can get on your computer. You can send your question to PHAPNA@HUD.gov. We've got computers here, email here. We're pulling these up, and so we'll try and answer as many of those questions that we have right here on the air, so you'll get the answers as quickly as possible. Anything we can't answer, we'll put on our FAQs.
Right.
That make sense? Is it okay to take a break now?
Yes.
Cool.
We should take a break.
Cool. All right, 5 minutes, and then we'll be right back. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. gentlemen. This is our question and answer period. As I mentioned before, we have an email address, which is PHAPNA@HUD.gov. You can send those email questions in. We have Bruce off to my left reading them and sorting through them, and he'll start throwing them out to our panel of experts. To my left, I'll let each one of you introduce yourself.
I'm only one, Bill. I'm Jaime Bordenave.
Matt Munter.
Ed Kramer.
Thank you all for joining us. Bruce, do we have any interesting questions?
Always interesting
Always,
questions. It's the answers. We have lots of PIC questions. People asking to get PIC data, but let me pick through a couple of them. When is the best time for an agency to request the PIC data? In this case, if your year end is 9/30. Somebody want to grab that?
Well, I think it's more a question of when you're going to get started.
Right.
And obviously, sooner is better than later. I don't know that there is a single date that if you're, from our chart there where you're due to submit it. Each housing authority is going to be different in terms of how long it's going to take them to gather all the data up. I would strongly recommend that you start today and go ahead and request the PIC data just to make sure that it's consistent with what you're showing for your inventory. This way, that part of it will be done. And then you can go ahead and begin to collect your architectural takeoffs and developing your effective useful life. And if your housing authority needs training, train the staff. And then if you're going to hire a contractor to do this, developing your solicitation. And so it's really going to be a function of when you're ready to get your P&A started and underway.
And I guess the one thing we'd want to add is you want to do this, not when you're ready to start the P&A, but you want to do it now because it can take a while to change the data you'll get from PICs. So you want to look at it right away for sure.
I guess the only other variable on that is that if you know you're going to have some changes in PIC data in the next 30 days or 60 days, you should wait until you've made those changes and they've taken effect, and that the download that you get actually reflects those changes, so that by the time you've downloaded your PIC data and are starting to work on it, it does accurately reflect your portfolio.
So I really think the consensus here is we need to think about what we're doing or what you're doing at your inventory right now,
Right.
Whether or not there needs to be any corrections. You might want to get the download now to see what it is versus what you're getting ready to do, so you can think about that.
And we do know everybody's not going to be perfectly on target on a particular day. I mean, we can work with special cases, but for most people, they can control kind of when their PIC data is the most stable.
Right.
So we have a question, actually two variations of the question. Will HUD be providing a list of qualified vendors? And how do I get to be a qualified vendor? Two separate questions.
I'll take the first one, and then I'll let Matt handle the second
Okay.
one. HUD does not have a list of certified vendors. Matt?
Does that render part two of the question null and void?
I would venture to say no, even though HUD doesn't have a list of qualified vendors. It's important for those housing authorities that are thinking about contracting the function out to begin thinking about that.
So I'll share a couple thoughts. So there are, I think, a core of vendors who do this kind of work, and there's a core of architectural engineering kind of firms that do this kind of work for housing authorities. So in the new standard, there are some minimum requirements for the P&A. Something to think about is that the energy audit is now a required part of the P&A. That does have specific training as well as licensing requirements for the folks doing the energy audit. So consider those together or separately as you decide what a qualified vendor is. If you're a vendor, an architect looking to learn about the GPNA tool, there's a number of places offering that kind of stuff, and I would start with NARO or one of the other housing trade groups that provides training to their members. I know NARO's doing a couple-day training class. And typically what we're seeing though is that those classes are about the HUD tool, not how to be an architect or an engineer or an energy guy. You've got to come with that, and then learning the tool is a couple days of how the formatting works.
Right. And it's just not learning the software itself and the formatting, it's understanding this whole process.
Yep.
Because as administrators, you got to know when it's due, the types of stuff, when updates are due, and other types of programmatic related issues associated with that. The last thing I would throw out is if you're thinking about contracting out, as Matt was saying, you really need to take a look at the requirements in the rule for both the GPNA and the energy audit. They have separate minimum qualifications for contractors. You want to be thinking about contractors who have done work with housing authorities associated with PNAs before, so you're looking for firms that are more qualified rather than less qualified to be working with housing authorities, because there are uniquenesses to the agencies.
And I think a related topic was referenced in the earlier presentation, which is that the housing authority staff, if you have staff who have the qualifications to do these inspections and provide the data, there's nothing wrong with the housing authority proceeding on that model that it's used in the past.
Great. Okay, so do we have another interesting question?
We have lots of interesting questions. Our 5-year plan expires within the next 12 months. Do we need to publish a 5-year plan without the GPNA and revise it after the GPNA is completed?
Yes and no.
Don't say that.
Yes to the first part of the question and no to the second part of the question.
Need to publish a 5-year plan without the GPNA revised.
If your 5-year plan is due before you need to submit your PNA, then you would go ahead and produce your 5-year and annual plan as you would otherwise. After you've submitted it, if you then do your PNA, you do not need to go back and change your annual and 5-year plan. But in the following year, when you update your annual plan, you would then have it reflect what you learned from your GPNA. Did I get that right?
Yes, you would still need to submit a GPNA, however.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So depending on the circumstances, it might make some sense for you to do the PNA that's required for the 5-year plan on the GPNA format. Again, it's not a requirement until it becomes a requirement, but it would help you to not duplicate work later on when you would have to do a PNA. The basis here is that everyone is going to have to do a PNA in the GPNA format after the rule becomes effective, regardless of how recently you did one in another format.
And keep in mind, when you're doing your 5-year and annual statements anyway, you have to have had some basis for deciding what kind of physical work you were going to do to begin with. So that presumably the whole notion of some sort of PNA, whether it's the HUD format or some other format, or whether it's just an architect or an engineer going out and doing a basic assessment, you would have identified work items that you would have needed anyway. So hopefully this isn't a completely new concept for you. It's just a question of the HUD software, being familiar with it, and the timing of the software.
Couple questions about what happens when I submit. Are there sanctions for failure to submit on time? And another question was, if I submit on time and there's, I can't find the exact, but basically there's a question about the data, am I still given credit for submitting on time? Is basically the question.
Well, the answer to the first question is yes, there are sanctions. If you go into the CAP Comp Grant Rule, 968 that I talked about earlier, there's a section in there dealing with non-compliance. It talks about how HUD going out and doing periodic reviews, and if they find deficiencies, we could issue a corrective action order or a notice of deficiency and require the housing authority to do whatever is needed to correct the deficiency. And so we still have that capacity to do that if you fail to submit your P&A on time. hopefully, because we have such a long time and you're looking at this, this training session now, you're becoming familiar with it. You realize that you got to start now to get this stuff ready to rock and roll. And so hopefully you'll realize that and get all this stuff done on time. Are there sanctions? Yes. Anytime you don't follow the federal regulations, there's the potential for sanctions. In the capital fund program, we have the corrective action order and notice of deficiency as one piece.
And the PNA rule and energy audit rule become part of the larger capital fund rule, so the sanctions are essentially
Right, it all
the same
melds
sanctions.
together.
Right.
Correct.
And on the question of if a submittal is made and there needs to be a technical correction or technical correction is brought to the attention of the housing authority, I don't have the rule right in front of me, but there is a cure provision in the rule, gives a number of months. Once you're notified, you need to correct within a period of time. So
And if you do it, but if you submit it on time and there are issues with it, I think the first part of the rule talks about the submission deadline. So if you submitted it on time, you should be good. Then if it gives you time to correct it, then you make sure you get that corrected and done as quickly as possible. And again, you're going to be working with the field office, and we're going to be notifying the field offices of any rejects. So the field office will be contacting you, getting with you, trying to figure out what the anomaly is. If it's a PIC anomaly, you get that fixed, and bingo bango, then we can get this back in on time.
Right. Questioner wants to know about the client database version, where they can get it, and maybe a word about what it is and what it does for you or may not do for you, where to get it. For the moment, you can request it at the same email account where you request the PIC data, but it will also be going up on our web page, hopefully very soon. So it will be made generally available. But you want to speak to the client version?
Well, if you're in a client server environment, you would install the client portion, on a protected server. It's very important that people don't have access, who don't know what they're doing, because it is very easy to mess up everybody's work. So, but you can have, individuals can have their portion to work on, then there'll be one master database on the server version.
I think that's the big difference, right? Is that in that version, it allows you to have multiple inspectors out at the same time, feeding data into a single database.
For housing authorities that require more than one person doing this thing.
Right. Otherwise, it's kind of take turns with the database, one person entering data
I
at a
do
time.
my part, and then I hand it over to you.
Exactly.
And actually, that's a good point to interject this point, that only a summary of what you're entering actually goes to HUD, and a lot of this data, you have the only copy, and it's very important you protect it using every method you would use to protect other important assets. Make sure the data is backed up in multiple places and well protected, because HUD cannot recover it for you. You're going to spend all this time gathering all this background information, and if anything happens, it's gone. So make sure that it's in a computing environment where it's protected and well backed up.
So it makes sense. It sounds like that the housing authority fit two groupings for them to use this. First, that they have a large portfolio or a lot of people who are going to be inspecting and entering data. Secondly, that they have the computer environment that can support that.
Right.
It's the first time I've heard this question. What should we do if the definition of the building types in the PIC data is inconsistent with the definition provided in the tool? Will redefining it in the tool create a problem on submission?
I would think we would have to look at that one to see exactly what they're talking about.
I think that I would.
Do you know what the question is? Is that where it's?
I don't know the specific circumstance, but I think the answer, I don't believe that we validate to.
Well, no. So it wouldn't
type of
cause a
building.
problem. But I'm wondering
it would still
If
validate.
we've already identified what the inconsistency is townhouse called something differently in the data?
Townhouse versus row house kind of question.
I think that's what the question is. And
Yeah.
so no, it's not going to overwrite anything in the big data.
Right, so,
Right.
so in the PNA tool, they can change the nomenclature to match what they call it locally,
Right.
and that's not gonna clash with what's uploaded in PIC. So what is compared at PIC when they do the upload? Can somebody comment on that?
Bruce probably knows best, but I think it's number of units, the way the units are allocated amongst the buildings, and amp, basically how the
Right.
amps roll up. So
and
there's
the
several
number of buildings.
right.
The number
So-
of amps, the number of buildings, the number of units, and the units associated with the buildings. So those are kind of the validation.
The
fields.
basic validation.
So it's not addresses of
No,
buildings and
no,
properties, so it's,
no. So there are adjustments that
Right.
can be made at the local level within the tool. One has to be somewhat careful with that. Never delete an ACC unit because that automatically changes the unit count. But you know, there are some of those adjustments that can be made locally.
Yeah, that's probably a good point to make this point too. Also that, you know, the tool can be at the minimum where you provide the minimum amount of data needed to get your numbers, but it also can store all kinds of information. It can store you can even put user manuals, pictures. There's places to hold all kinds of information, and you know, you can modify the building names, not the numbers, and you know, anything to make it more useful to you for other uses. You're going to all the trouble to gather this data, and the tool has a lot of capabilities that you can expand upon to make it a repository for a lot of your data.
We got time for maybe 3 or 4 more questions, maybe?
Okay. How does the GPNA relate to moving to work PHAs?
I believe the
trick
rule
question.
says, I believe the rule
You
says,
read the rule.
I believe the rule says that all PHAs have to complete the GPNA.
And I believe it specifically says, including moving to work PHAs. Thinking about it being an important tool for everybody, from the HUD perspective, that's good data for us to have to see, you know, be able to see, okay, how does this group of MTWs maybe perform any differently? Do they look different? It's a useful data set for everyone.
So we're going out with the first parameter, which is everybody's got to have it.
Right.
That's the bottom line. In theory, in the Moving to Work program, when you apply, you can get exemptions from statutes and regulations. But at this juncture, for the at least the initial outward push, everybody's going to have one.
This questioner completed a PNA in 2010. Could you use the data from that PNA to complete the GPNA since it is not more than 5 years old, as long as it met the minimum requirements?
So Bruce, the shelf life currently is 2 years, right?
Right.
And so by the time this rolls out, and then depending on when your fiscal ends, it's measured from submission. I think it's pretty clear at this point that 2010 is going to need to be redone.
Right.
Now, if you had the consultant that did it before come out and they use the old report, is that of value? Sure. So, but you cannot just go in and take the 2010 data and enter it into the tool.
And that's assuming it was done on a 20-year life cycle and.
Right.
Yeah, got to meet all the requirements. So, and that, I think that is one of the things that we see when we're out, is that a lot of PNAs that are done prior to this regulation, where some specificity about level of detail came out, they wouldn't meet today's standard.
Okay, you get one more question.
One more. Oh, okay. So if we didn't get to your question, we will answer your question by return email, and if it's broadly relevant, we'll put it in FAQ.
And there'll be a second session of Q&A this afternoon.
Correct.
We have 206 ACC units in a mixed finance development. They were built at 3 different phases. Do we need to inspect those units, and if so, what percentage do we need to inspect? So we're looking at 206 ACC units in a mixed finance development, I think is the formula there.
In a mixed finance.
In a mixed finance, yeah.
And
So it's probably a larger development.
Yeah.
Right. So
206 of the units
So they'll
are.
sample the 206.
Right. If the project is 206, you do the sample based on the 206. We have a general parameter, and keep in mind that the sampling methodology comes from the Public Housing Modernization Standards Handbook, and it starts off with a minimum of 10% of the units, and it also provides, and the key for the whole sampling methodology keys off of the extent to which conditions are the same. If you see a lot of the same conditions, you don't need to do as much. If you got a lot of differing conditions, like, for example, you have a high rise here, you got a walk up here, you got single family detached here, all in the same amp, then you're going to have more than the minimum of 10% because you got a lot of differing conditions. And so that's the basic parameters in terms of the individual amps. This is one of those things that when you're preparing for all of this, and we'll talk about this in a minute, you need to be thinking about your sample set. Anybody else?
Well, let me ask you a question on that. If the mixed finance development has the ACC units floating, should they restrict their sampling to the currently occupied ACC units, or should they do a broader selection across the whole property?
Seems to me it's got to be representative of the whole property if those units are floating.
Right.
And we've seen that as well with ADA compliance, PHAs. It needs to float across. If potentially you're going to be putting people in apartments, you got to look at representative apartments.
And I think from a statistical perspective, that would give you a better sense of the conditions at the entire property, which is what you're looking for, and what your physical needs are. So that makes sense.
You want to move along with steps to get ready?
I think it's time for us. You can still submit questions at PHAPNA@HUD.gov, but we want to move along now because we also want to get to the demo, which is going to be very helpful for you to get a sense of how that works. So the next question is, okay, I'm a housing authority, what do I need to do? And we've sort of been hinting at that over time since we started an hour or so ago. Emphasize, emphasize, emphasize. Today is not too early to get started because of all of the work. It's not rocket science, but it's doable. And you just need to get started. So getting started today in terms of looking at this stuff, educating yourself, will be to your benefit. Don't put stuff off like my 19-year-old daughter does. She waits till the last minute to get stuff done. So having said that, the first step in preparing your GPNA and your energy audit is to decide whether or not you want to contract it out or not. And I mentioned that before. That's a big decision. It's going to depend on whether or not you have the staff or don't have the staff. The other consideration is the energy audit. Do you want to do them separately, or do you want to do them in a central solicitation? And it all depends on what you think your capacity is in your community where you're going to be advertising. You know, there are some companies that can do both. There are some companies that do one real well, and some companies that do others real well. And so this is a judgment call that you're going to have to make, taking all of those things into consideration. But you need to think about it if you're going to if you're going to contract it out. We talked about the fact that if you're going to do it yourself, the staff has to have the capability of doing these types of assessment. So part of the question you have to ask yourself is, does your staff have the experience in doing physical needs assessments? Or whether or not this is a new activity for them. If it's something they've never done before, then they're probably not going to do as good a job as if they've done 15 or 20 of these. What kind of technical skills do you have in-house in terms of architecture, engineering, construction management, and cost estimating capability? That's another type of thing that you need to think about. How much time does your staff have? Are you up to your eyeballs in work, or do you have enough time to be able to accomplish this yourself? How likely will the staff remain at the housing authority? If you've got somebody that's getting ready to leave the housing authority in the next 6 months, you might want to think about bringing somebody, if you want to do it in-house, bringing somebody along who is likely to stay. And having been a manager, I know that it's hard to tell who's going to stay and who's going to go, but sometimes you usually have indications of what that is. So from a staff capacity, you need to look at all of those types of things. The cost library, you have to make a decision in terms of whether or not you're going to go out and purchase it, or you're going to have your GPNA provider purchase it, or do you already have an architect or an engineer on staff that has it? So you need to think about getting the cost estimating software in one of those groupings. Timing is another critical thing in terms of, we talked about it's due 120 days before the beginning of your fiscal year. So you need to think about that in scheduling it. Think about the complexity and difficulties you have of your portfolio. If your portfolio was built in the late 70s, you probably don't have as much of a problem. If you've got a lot of scattered sites, that's going to be more challenging than if you have one project, it's a single building and it's an elderly high-rise. That's going to be an easier exercise. So, the type of portfolio that you have is going to drive a lot of this. Technology. We're getting more and more into technology to the point where when the kids are born these days, they're already pulling out their iPhones and things like that. So
They have an IP address.
IP, right. Instead of a social security card, now they get an IP address. So technology is something that I always encourage housing authorities, you got to adopt, because technology is here. The phones that we have now are almost as good as Captain Kirk's communicator. The only thing they don't do right now is to beam me up, and I would suspect within a week or so it'll do that. The whole country is going electronic, as you can see by the GPNA being a piece of software that you have to use. So if you're one of those who's been slow to take up technology, you really need to embrace it. And I think Ed's comments about backing stuff up is, I can tell you I've had a number of hard drives that have failed. I've had a number of backup hard drives that have failed. So all of my stuff is backed up in the cloud nowadays. So, this whole issue of technology is very important as you administer your program as well as the GPNA. So the question is, how good are you from a technology perspective? If you don't know how to turn on a computer, then you're going to have a problem. And so you need to think about that. We talked about contracting out the GPNA and the energy audit. You need to think about that. Think about whether or not it makes any sense for you based on your portfolio. If you're going to do a competitive solicitation, it's probably going to do competitive proposals with an RFP. You need to think about the evaluation factors, which should be pulling from the rule, and we also have a model in the GPNA Users Guide. Is that what you're going to say?
Right.
Yeah, we're beginning to think alike as we go. The Users Guide that's on our web has a model scope of work. It's not a full RFP, but it's a scope. And that gives you a sense of the types of things that you want in there. But you got to make sure you get the qualifications and things like that, and you make sure that the contractor is using the HUD GPNA software as well as incorporating the energy audit requirements. And it needs to be on an AMP by AMP basis. If you're contracting out, I mentioned before, you need to think about, do I want to contract out both functions in the same RFP, or do I want to do them separately? Think about using the model language that we had in our user's guide. I mentioned that before. Ensure that the solicitation includes all the critical requirements that is in the procurement regulations at 8536 in our beloved procurement handbook, using the standard forms, construction, non-construction forms. Consider a contractor, if you're going to contract it out, you might want to have the contractor be responsible for doing all the architectural takeoffs. That'll cut down on the amount of time you have to do. You want to make sure that they maintain electronic files and on compatible software with the GPNA software, and make sure they provide you with that software so that you have it. It's not just resident in your contractor's files. You also want to have probably a written report. The software itself does a written report, but it's helpful if the contractor not only gives you a written report in terms of their observations beyond just the mechanical collection of data, but also possibly give your staff and the executive director and maybe the board an oral presentation in terms of what they found. A lot of times you can get a lot of information from talking to somebody and getting their personal observations in terms of what they saw, as opposed to just getting a piece of paper that's generated as a result of the software pushing the print button. So these are important types of things you want to think about as you get thinking about contracting out that particular function. The other thing is you need to make sure that your staff in the housing authority understand this whole exercise. And you'll notice that as we describe this, it pretty much covers everybody, because your board of commissioners and your executive director have to understand this in terms of all of the pieces that go into it. Your property managers and maintenance supervisors need to understand this, because this is going to affect their lives. The asset management function. Your architects and engineers need to understand it, because if they're not doing the P&A for you as they develop plans and specifications, they need to be thinking about what's in your P&A that's done, and you should be providing that to them. We talked about the whole issue of housing authority technology. If you have people in your housing authority that deal with technology, this is going to have to be resident on your files. You're going to have to be uploading it to HUD. And so there's a very big IT piece to this. Finance, accounting, and procurement. If you're contracting it out, you're paying a contractor. All of this plays into it. And I think your entire housing authority staff at least needs to have a minimum educational knowledge in terms of what the P&A is, what the requirement is, because it's very staff intensive, particularly, as I mentioned before, the first year. So as you begin working through this process that I just described, you also want to have a conversation with your local field office. Each field office should have appointed a point of contact that will be assigned to your housing authority. So if you don't already know who that person is, you need to find out so that you can begin to start that level of communication between your point of contact and as well as the people who are going to be doing this at the individual PHA level, so that you're going to be able, they'll know what you're doing and they'll be able to help you as quickly as possible. Each housing authority should have its own PHA contact. Somebody in the agency that's responsible for making sure that this gets done on a timely basis and gets submitted to HUD. And this way, again, communications is key to having a successful completion of this P&A. So you need to begin teaching yourself and others about the GPNA and the energy audit requirements. I mentioned before that we have these videos on the GPNA website. We have the software, we have the user's guide, we have these webcasts. The January 10th is already on there. This one will be put on there shortly after we're finished. So these are great tools. I know Bruce did 2 or 3 of them yourself. Those are on there. There's lots of information in terms of this. You gotta pull the trigger and start using the material. As I mentioned, there's a user's guide on there. And if it's still a little bit of time before you have to submit yours, maybe you want to do a practice GPNA inspection just to get, even if it's only a couple of projects or a couple of units, to get the flow of this thing, so that when it's time to do it for real, then you're going to feel better and you're going to feel more comfortable. Because I can assure you, because I've done it, it takes a little bit of practice to do this. But once you get into the mode, this thing goes relatively quickly, because you get used to what you're looking for, you get used to the software, you get used to what you have to put down on pen and paper if you're using pen and paper. So you need to have a plan to be able to get this thing done. I typically like to have a timeline for when I'm going to get things done, and I usually work my way backward. So you think about that whole process in terms of how to do that. So you need to have an implementation schedule for how you're going to get it done. You need to talk with the field office about the PIC building and unit data characteristics. We've talked about that several times, but we want to make sure we emphasize it, so that's one less thing that we have to worry about. If the PIC building and unit data characteristics don't match, it ain't gonna work. Right?
Right.
That's, yes, Bill is
Yes,
correct.
Bill.
Yes, Bill is the correct answer. Okay. You need to begin collecting GPNA data at the property level. So you might want to start thinking about going out and looking at this whole exercise and doing your architectural takeoffs and running your calculations in terms of the effective useful life and the remaining useful life for each of the building systems that we have to deal with. You need to start thinking about making the calculations for your architectural takeoffs. How many square feet of roof area do you have? How many square feet of floor tile? All of those things in there, because when you get in there, there's a good bit of work. And as I've said time and time again, this all takes time. It's not rocket science, but you can get it done. But it's all in preparation. So those are the types of things that you want to think about as you do these things. What else here? The GPN, we talked about the whole issue of sampling a couple of minutes ago, and the sampling methodology starts off with the Modernization Standards Handbook, where we have a minimum of 10% if all the conditions are known to be about the same. As you get into non-dwelling spaces, probably the minimum you're going to want to do is 20. You could do as much as 100% depending on what aspects you're dealing with and whether or not conditions are different. If you've got non-dwelling spaces that are all the same, very, very little, then 20% is probably okay. If you've got non-dwelling spaces in different structure types, different ages, things like that, different types of use. Some properties get a harder use than others, like elderly properties don't wear as much. So as you get differing conditions, you need to look at more and more and more. So think about that sampling methodology. Is there anything else I've forgotten in terms of getting ready?
That's the basics, although on the sampling, I would say that's another area that's very much in the Housing Authority's judgment and their provider to assist them with if they're using a provider. Mm-hmm. There really is not a universal formula for a sample.
For example, when HUD does its REACT physical inspections, it's got statistically valid random sample methodology built into the software. And once you get your building and unit data characteristics in there, you push the calculate sample button, and it tells you which units to go to. We don't have that here. What we have is an attempt to try and give you a greater degree of flexibility in doing this. We're mirroring the modernization standards, which have a lot of flexibility. But the key here, the big key, is making sure that you get a representative sample. Because if you don't have a representative sample, the whole exercise is a waste. Because this is designed to help you make your strategic decisions in terms of what are you going to use your capital funds in the short term, and what am I going to do with my portfolio in the long term, given the funding streams that I either have or don't have. If you don't have them, then you got to think about, where can I go to get them, and how much do I need? And the how much deals with your backlog and your accrual over time. So I think we're at the point where we're going to take a quick 5-minute break.
Right.
We're going to go into the next phase, which will be our demonstration of the software and the energy audit.
Right.
Correct.
Yes, Bill.
Yes, Bill. There
Yes,
you
Bill.
go. I love it. By the end of the thing, everybody's going to do it in sequence.
And this is the place and the time when people need to log into the WebEx,
Okay.
right? Is that here?
That is correct.
Okay, that's here. So
Yes.
for those of you that received an email for this meeting, on the email are the instructions of where to log in and the phone number to call for the audio portion. You'll hear us, but you won't be able to communicate that way. So if you do have questions, you're still coming in on PHAs.
We can put that up on the screen here as well in a second, the phone number to
Right,
dial into.
right. The phone number to dial into and the WebEx
Access codes?
access codes.
Correct. Okay, we'll take a break now. Thank you.
Yes, Bill?
Good afternoon. Welcome back to our, I guess it's the third section of our GPNA training for today. We're going to have a demonstration, and there are a couple key points I want to make sure that we share with you again. I've sort of repeated them 4 or 5 times over the last couple of hours. However, I want to point out that this is a new activity for us. The software just came out. It's been on the web. It's going to be new. It hasn't been used by the housing authorities or HUD for this particular exercise before. And so, as we talked about, it's going to take a little time. It's going to take effort, going to take education and training, and patience by both housing authorities and HUD. I think we can get there. It's just like any other new thing. It's a little scary at first, but we'll get through it. So, the other thing I'd share with you as you get further into this process is that it assumes that the people doing the GPNA in the energy audit are experienced in performing these functions. The training isn't designed to teach you how to actually do a PNA or do an energy audit. If you're going to do the PNA or you're going to do the energy audit for the housing authority, whether it's staff or whether it's a contractor, you should already know the functions to begin with. It's just a function of learning the software and the requirements of the regulation to be able to successfully do this. So those are a couple key points. At this juncture, I'm going to turn it over to Bill Campion, and he's going to give us our demonstration on the WebEx.
Great. Good afternoon.
And we got a couple emails through the chat here that the audio was too low. If you all are still having trouble hearing that, keep shooting those messages here, and we'll get that calibrated on our end.
Great. Thank you for the intro, Bill. And yeah, I will speak up if possible. First thing that I think everyone's heard during the course of the day, we've got to start early on the project. Start early getting the data, getting organized, and getting the necessary documentation correct for the tool. I think the first thing that we're assuming and we're all starting with is a full understanding that you've got correct PIC data. Never too early to start, and I'll just show a couple slides on the PIC data, assuming that, again, we've started and gotten that phase complete before we're doing the actual GPNA. But PIC data import screen is at the upper right hand of the control panel. Once you've got the PIC data correct, it's a pretty simple process. You hit the button, search for it on your desktop, and that loads into the tool pretty quickly. That should be pretty uneventful. As long as the data is complete, you'll start to see some of the amps down the left-hand side of your control panel. Another thing that we're assuming that you're going into the process having already completed is the cost library. That may be a little bit more difficult. There's a couple of ways to do that. One is a line-by-line entry of a cost library. You may do that with an RS Means or a Marshall and Swift or another set of industry guidelines available to you. This process is a line-by-line entry into a cost library direct through the tool. There's also an option to enter this information into the Excel system by first downloading an empty cost library, filling those items into an Excel table, and then re-importing those back into the tool. So 2 key assumptions that we're assuming starting the actual GPNA, building sets, doing the actual assessment, and populating the tool is that you have both correct data set imported, PIC data all imported, and a cost library imported. All right, now we'll get into a little bit of the actual tool. We'll do some of the creation of the building and the unit sets. For that, I'd like to just briefly touch on some of the flexibility in the tool. You may have several different categories, and I'm certain at this point that we've got a solution for all of the various types of categories of amps, buildings, and locations that you may encounter and you may have at your PHA. Just a few of them are listed here. We've got single building types, multiple building types, and several different amps. We've got some Hope 6 financing, and I'll just run through a few of those different combinations and permutations of building types, amps, and and individual units. Here we've got a basic Lakeview Towers. This is one close to us here. It's 161 units. There's efficiencies, 1 beds, and 504 units, all in the same building, a single building and an amp. Pretty straightforward case. Here in El Paso, we've got basically multiple building types. We've got 2-story townhomes, garden style, and Kennedy Estates is actually detached homes in a single amp. In Cuyahoga, we've got Bel Air Road apartments, scattered site townhomes, Purita Gardens, West 101st Place, several different building types with scattered sites in a single amp. Looking one of our favorites, this is Minneapolis. We've got basically 3 different locations, 3 different sites in 1 amp. And that presents just minor challenges, but again, the tool collects and encompasses and really pulls all this data together in a single, easy-to-use fashion. And then we've got some of the mixed financing. Here in Hayes Garden, we've got 195 family townhomes, 117 are public housing, and 78 are reserved for families earning less than 50% of the San Francisco Bay Area median outcome. Villages at East Lake, another mixed income community. There's townhomes and garden apartments. There's 542 units here, but 271 are floating units. So what we're showing here is that, regardless of the type of amp, the number of buildings, the types of buildings within an amp, or whether those are spread across multiple amps, the tool can capture the diversity of those units and easily start to create building sets to account for the variation between all the units.
So what of why we just showed all those pictures is we're talking about building sets, and those are all different examples of the simplest one, a 1 building high rise. That's a 1 building set. The one where he showed you 3 amps, that is obviously each amp is a different building set. Within that, each development within the amp, that's a different building set. So that's what we're going to show you how to build. Now, we're getting some comments that it sounds like folks that are on the phone can hear us, but phones that are trying to listen to audio on the WebEx aren't getting it.
Right, they need to be on the phone.
So they need to be on. I guess if you hear this message, you're on the phone, right?
They need to dial on the phone as well as the WebEx.
Shoot them.
Should I list the number here? Or is it?
It's in somebody's message above. So. Yeah, there you go. All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
All right, once you open up your tool, again, you've got 2 options: continue to the dashboard, continue to the control panel. A couple things about this tool. You'll see nothing here in the dashboard. This is basically a roll-up and categorization, the slicing and dicing of all the information that you've entered into your tool. We're starting from scratch here. Only 2 things in this new tool are the pick data, which you can see it's got a name of the HA, and we've got a cost library here. All right. So from the library, we'll head over to the control panel. And you can see you've got the HA. You can edit your HA information. I will start by looking at the first development here. Double-clicking on that opens up the developments. This is Burwood Gardens. You can see here that it's got the list of walk-ups. This is 10 walk-up buildings. It's got 0, 1, and 2 bedroom units, and they're currently not assigned to any building set. If I try that for the next development, I've got 23 townhouse buildings. I've got 11 walk-up multifamily buildings. I've got 0 through 4 units, and again, they're not assigned to any of the building sets. I will work on this third one. I've got Pinewood Village. Essentially, I've got 5 walk-up multifamily buildings, 2 elevator structures with various units in there, 0, 1, and 2, currently all unassigned. All right. I will start with this amp, and I will basically create a site for this amp. Now, one of the tools that we use, essentially when we're not in the field, we got to be a little bit resourceful and figure out what exactly we're looking at. It's helpful to populate this data with a good image of what you're trying to assess. We know that this site is at 7885 Gordon Court, so we will take a look at
Whoa.
Oh, let's see here, 7885. Yep. All right. Oh. We're taking you across the world here with Google Maps. And here is our site. As the PIC data, the correct PIC data was showing, you've got 2 walk-up buildings here. 5 walk-up buildings, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 2 high-rises, 2 tower buildings. So from there, we start to do our takeoffs and enter information into the tool. I'll get back over to the tool. The site name I will call Pinewood Park. The address is 7885 Gordon Court. That's Glen Burnie. That is Maryland. And it's 21100. The property area, again, going back to my image, property area looks to be about 10 acres. But again, this is all information that your staff or the PNA provider should be able to estimate and come up with fairly quickly. I'm going to say this is 450,000 square feet. The gross parking area is 50,000 square feet. The paved area is 20,000 square feet. I didn't see any playgrounds, tennis courts, basketball courts, save and close. And again, that was done from this image here.
And you were able to calculate the square feet from that?
I was. Now, again, you know, we talked about the qualifications of the skills and the staff. Anyone looking at the drawings, and if the site, the PHA has an actual site plan, should be able to do a fairly easy and fairly quick takeoff.
Right off the site plan?
Right off the site plan.
Okay. As opposed to getting a little chalk stick and measuring the number of square feet.
That's probably not the way to do it. You've seen guys out there with the wheel. It's probably a pretty good approximation.
So part of the takeaway for you housing authority folks and the people that are going to do this, for example, having a site map is going to be helpful.
Absolutely.
For each one of these sites. So this is all a part of your prep work
Yep.
before you get into the, because you can do this in 5 minutes with a site plan.
Yes.
With the little chalk and the wheel thing, that's going to take you
2.5 hours.
2.5 hours to measure the site.
That's
So
right. All right.
it's all in the preparation.
All right. So I've added a site. Now I'm going to add a building set for my buildings. I've got a couple choices. I like to use the actual drop-down menu here. I know that there's walk-ups, and I know that there's towers from the previous screen. I've got 5 buildings in my walk-up set. I'm going to move them all over, and I'm going to create this set and call it my walk-ups. And I can create the footprint for those walk-ups. I will say that those are 15,000 in the area. We'll call it 25,000. The perimeter, we'll call them 6,000, and average height, we'll call them 200. Stories, we'll call them 3-story walk-ups. And I've created this building set. Pretty straightforward. Has a few different bedroom types in it, which we'll get to in unit sets. Now, they were both walk-ups and an elevator buildings, so I'm going to add another second building set. Do that by clicking building sets, and I'm going to call those my towers. And I remember from the Google image that there were 2 of them. If I go to my elevator buildings, they are both here. I'm going to add them both to the same set. I could add a single building if they were different from my image. I could add one building, maybe was rectangular, had different systems, operated differently, but these two are fairly similar. You can see by the shape of them. I'm going to put them in the same building set. I'll add one, and then I'll add the other. Save and close. Again, there's information here that I could add about the footprint, but I'll put in basic information here. Area 15.
And there was a question earlier about the structure type. I mean, you've got a drop down there, so you're selecting the structure type off the drop down menu, and
Right.
that's not overwriting anything that's already in your pick data.
Right.
Select the most applicable.
All right.
Or
And for everybody's benefit, you notice what Bill is going through here. He has to do the calculations on each building set for the number of square feet, and then perimeter, height, and stories, and that sort of stuff. So again, this is more data that you have to put into the system.
That's correct. Save and close, and that creates both building sets for the tower and the walk-ups. All right, I will continue to work in the towers, and I will move again left to right over to the unit sets. Now, I'm looking at the towers, and again, if I go to the drop-down, these are the numbers of my efficiencies. If I click on ones, these are the numbers of my units of my one-bedroom type, and these are units of my two-bedroom type. You'll see that there are none for 3 or 4. I'll start with the two bedroom units, and I'll say that these are 2 bedrooms. 2 beds. And I will move these all over to my 2-bedroom unit type. Save and close. I've got 2 beds. Adding another unit set. These are my 1-bedrooms. I will move those all over. And I will call these my 1-bedrooms.
And Bill, while you're doing that, so the exercise isn't necessarily just to take all those that are indicated in PIC as 1-bedrooms and move them over like Bill is doing for the demo here. The question is, are they all the same? Are they all the same square footage? So when you're developing your cost profile, are these all getting the same stuff? If they're not, and we know they're not, there's going to be ADA units. There's going to be some units that have a different layout. There's going to be some that were fire units that were renovated and are on a fundamentally different replacement schedule than the rest. That's the expectation here, is that you're pulling those over into separate groups.
And the point of setting up the tool this way by bedroom size was to do the first cut for you. Obviously, in PIC, we don't have that level of detail of information. All we know is it's a group of 2 bedrooms or 1 bedrooms. We don't know the detail beyond that. That's what you know at your housing authority.
That's right. Both great points. I'd like to show first what happens in the case that we have 2 different types of 2 bedrooms. And I'd also like to show the completeness of the actual PIC data. The tool won't let you enter more units that you already have. And I'll click on this 2 bedrooms, and I will edit the unit set. I'm going to say that these 2 bedrooms also, these are the 2 bedrooms, 1 baths. And in order for me to basically make another set, 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, I'm going to have to remove some of these items because my unit sets have to be collectively exhaustive. So I will move some of these back over.
And this is assuming in real life that they were actually 2 baths.
Absolutely. So now I've got a smaller set. These are the ones that are my 2-bedroom, 1 baths. I'll call these the 2-bedroom, 1 bath. And no half baths, and ceiling heights are 8. Floor areas are 785 square feet. I'm going to save and close. Now I've still got units available that haven't been assigned to a unit set, and I can see that by clicking here that there will be some unassigned units in my elevator buildings. And I have to go to the building set. Okay, so, sorry. All right. I'm going back to my unit set. I'm going to add my unit set here. I'm going to call this my 2 beds, no baths, or 2 beds, 2 baths. I head down to my 2 And here are all the sites that have not been assigned to a unit set. I will move them all over. These have 2 baths, no half baths, ceiling height 8 feet, and my floor area. These are a little larger than the 1 bath units, so I'm going to call these 850. Save and close. And now all of my unit sets, all my units have been assigned to a set. I will also create a common area building for the tower, and I'll call this the community building. All right, or community room. And there's one of them. This will be 400. Average ceiling height will be 10 for this building, and gross will be 1,200 square feet. Save and close. So now I've got all my building sets created for my development. I've broken my entire AMP down into its component units, and I've got a community room here associated with that. So what I'd like to do next is actually work on inspecting some of these units, adding deficiencies to these locations, and then running a cross projection. So the first thing I'd like to demonstrate here is I've got a deficiency in my tower. I'm going to inspect my building site. I need to add an inspection, and my building name is one of these towers. I'm going to add it to the first tower. I'm the inspector. I am Bill. The address is 7885 Gordon Court. And this is my first GPNA assessment.
Your rookie event.
Yeah, that's right. In my building, the item I'd like to add is on the interior, so it's the system. The first item I'd like to add for my, my deficiency is my chiller. I'm going to call this the main chiller. In my tower, there's one of them. My installation year, again, information that the staff or the GPNA provider should know, be able to find the installation year and how many years are left on that chiller. I'm going to say there's 5 years left. My replacement percent and my refurbishment percent must total 100. I'm going to say this is a full replacement, and I'm going to leave a comment that says very old, heavily used.
And you notice that there's the year of installation. I don't want the housing authority folks to freak out if you don't know that the year of installation. Take your best guess, and then the remaining useful life of the component will take care of everything else, because that's going to tell us when it comes out. As you begin putting in new systems, you'll have the correct installation date, which will then have the effective useful life in it. That'll tell us what we need to know. But in any event, we'll have the remaining useful life. And I don't want you to get too freaked out if you don't know the exact installation date for your individual element. So don't freak out. Don't commit suicide. We can get this thing done. Okay.
Yeah. All right, great. So I've added a comment here. One thing I'd also like to add, as I mentioned in the previous session, is an attachment, a photo of this chiller. So I will add that by clicking that box, going to add, and it will actually search on my computer for an actual picture. I will go to my recent places, pictures, and here is a picture of my chiller. I will add that by clicking OK, and there it is. I will save and close, and I'll move it to the next item. I will do the same for a large boiler. I'll call this the main boiler. There's one of them. Installation year, let's call this 1980. My RUL is 2. Our replacement percent is 100. Comment, leaking. And I'll add an attachment here. Add, which essentially just points to the picture. I will insert that and save and close. So I've got a boiler and a chiller that need replacement in my main building. I'm going back to the control panel. I'm going to the units now. I will take a look at the efficiencies. There they are. I'm going to add an inspection to my efficiency units. Same thing, I will add an inspection. I'm going to do 7885 Gordon Court. All right. GPNA 2, I'll give it a name. Add and close. I'm looking at Gordon Court, and I will add toilets. Let's see if I can find that here. Okay, my description is old 3 GPF toilets. Take off, let's see. I will actually in each unit there's 1. Installation year 1970. RUL 2. And replacement percent 100. And I will save and close. And essentially, I get back to the control panel, and I could do that ad nauseum for all the items that I've observed as part of my, my GPNA. I've looked at the condition of these items, and I've come up with individual items that I think need to be repaired, replaced. And I've got those in there, and once that is done, I get over to the cost projection. One step that I want to back up and take a look at, I've inspected my building sets. I want to make sure that I've added my takeoffs from pre-assessment. And let's see. System here. Want to add all my takeoffs. Add all the information that I put in previously. Make sure that my library is updated. Inspection, add and close. I'm going to cancel that. I'm going to go to my control panel and look at my cost projection. So I didn't import my cost library.
Yeah.
All right.
Go to cost library.
Cost library.
Master cost library, and you want to go to the bottom? Yeah.
Update developments and amps with complete library.
Well, you're seeing an important part of the process, that nothing happens in here until you have a cost library populated.
Correct.
And that's one of the big things that is in the things you can do to get started now.
Right.
Is think about, are you developing your own cost library, or if you're using a consultant, are they going to bring that with,
Yep.
or are you going out to one of the industry resources like RS Means, et cetera? So either way, you're going to have to name your source and then populate it in, pull it across to each development.
Yep, it's populated. It's the master cost library. We assume that we had that one started here. What needs to be done is it needs to be disseminated to each individual amp.
And as he was just showing you, just to stay with that thought, that's a one-step process.
Yep.
To disseminate the master cost library down into all the amps is a one-step process.
Mhm.
Why do you do it that way? You might have some unusual components only at certain amps, and you would then customize
Sure.
those individual cost libraries.
Let me ask you a loaded question.
Sure.
Let's say we're using one of the commercial cost indices
Mm-hmm.
to populate that.
That's right.
Is there an electronic means of taking the data from the cost indices like Means and Marshall Swift or Beck's and electronically import it easily, as opposed to manually entering in, square foot for, lumber and all the other good stuff that's in the cost library?
All right. There's no way to do that electronically. No one-step process that says, give me everything you have and put it into the... Second, it would be very expensive to do that. And third, the universe of items in RS Means are not what you're going to see typically at every housing authority. So you'll probably see less than 1% of all the items that are in means
Okay.
in the actual cost
So,
library.
so the takeaway for the housing authorities is this is another piece that's labor intensive. You
Right.
get the commercial cost indices, and then you have to look at your cost library, and you have to go back, pull out the cost data, then manually input it into the software.
That's right.
That's going to take time.
It's gonna take some-
While we're there, because it also addresses a couple of questions that have
Sure.
come in.
Okay.
We pre-populate 280 some odd components.
Yes.
A typical housing authority, I would guess, would probably be using somewhere in the vicinity of 50 to 100 components. They're not going to use all of
That's
those
right.
components. So
Okay.
that's just one, not being overwhelmed by the number of components shown in the tool itself. And the question comes, where do I get these cost indexes? What cost indexes can we, if not recommend, at least advise are nationally recognized cost indexes, and where are they? I think the question came in particularly referencing that there's a lot of volumes to RS means. Is there particular volumes of that?
So I'll go first, Bill.
Okay.
The RS means is kind of the nationally recognized. RS means has a bunch of different books. There's the one that Bill referenced that you decide how many 2x4s you need and how many guys at what hourly rate it's going to take to nail them together. That's not the one that you want for this. You want the one that's called assemblies that has things already put together and into complete things. There's a square foot cost guide as well that does the same trick. So those are the two that you would look at. And if you go online with RS means, you can sample those before you decide which one is a best fit for you. Marshall and Swift is another recognized one that construction folks use that also breaks a building down into thousands of parts. But they're the same parts you're going to be using here. It's appliances, it's roofing, it's bathrooms and fixtures, and all the key components that wear out in housing. There is some stuff available at National Association of Home Builders. The other thing that's in your cost library is remaining useful life data. How long will this component last? RS Means has that. Marshall and Swift's has that. There's some decent stuff out there. It's been mentioned in previous discussions. Fannie Mae has something, but I wouldn't recommend the Fannie Mae be used. That was developed just for Fannie Mae about 15 years ago. It's a very short list of items, and it's dated. So that hasn't kept up with changes in the industry. So I would go outside of that. So I would say Home Builders, Means, Marshall, Swift. Any others that you think of?
Not as generally accepted as those.
The bottom line takeaway is that it's up to the discretion of the housing authority to use their best professional judgment, whether it's the housing authority or the housing authority's professionals, the architects and engineers or other professionals that they work with, in terms of what's best for the housing authority. The government makes no recommendation with regard to any of those. Moreover, if your housing authority maintains its own cost database that has all of the costs that you need in here, that's absolutely fine too. We're not wedded to necessarily the data source. Obviously, we want the best, most accurate data for you, because that'll give you the best, most accurate data upon which to make your own decisions when dealing with your PHA plan and your mission and your goals and what you want to do with your inventory. And that's why it's better to have the more accurate and more reliable data rather than not. So, that being said,
Sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, no.
Good stuff.
All right, so now that I've got the cost library out, spread throughout the database in all the AMPs, I can run a cost projection. And that cost projection, if I run inspection projections, that was also good. All right. All right, so here you'll see the items that I've entered. I didn't remember that part. Chillers, my main boiler, and my toilets. All right, with those entered, I can head over to the control panel, and I can start to look at the reports, and I can get a PNA summary. I can print the summary and export to Excel. So I will show the overall PNA summary. There won't be many things here, but these are the forms
This is artificially short just for the demonstration purposes.
Absolutely.
And this is a readable form that the software generates so that you'll be able to provide this information. For example, it talks about providing the information to the resident and the resident advisory board. You're probably going to want to share this with the executive director and the board of commissioners. So the system gives you a user-friendly vehicle to provide, to display the information.
Needs by year, needs by type, and needs by category are all other reports that could be run. I think we'll stop here on the demo for a moment, and we'll start to talk about energy, and we talk about individual categories.
Okay.
Sounds good. And we do see some questions coming in from folks, so we're going to save some time at the end of this to
Yes.
try to knock down as many of those questions as we can.
Yeah, we've got about a half hour total left.
All right, so what do I, like 10 minutes for me? 5?
15.
All right, so hey, we wanted to take a minute to talk about the energy audit. Now, this has all been a conversation about the GPNA, and the energy audit is a companion piece of this. The energy audit should be done at the same time. HUD expects it to be done at the same time. HUD expects it to be populated into the database at the same time. So here's a couple things that you're going to need to know as you're going through this with respect to the energy audit. Number one, there's no approved format. So HUD just requires that the final rule be met. And if you go to the next slide, we've got a couple nuggets there. And then, so we're going to bring this back in about 5 minutes to show you where in the GPNA tool this goes, because I can see you guys leaving the WebEx. I saw a couple guys just punch out. But it's coming back to the GPNA. So minimum quals. Bruce, you talked earlier about minimum quals for the PNA. The energy audit also has some minimum quals in their BPI inspector, ResNet inspector. These are energy auditor certification kind of credentials. And we talk about this being an ASHRAE level 2 type of audit, and I'll show you in the next slide the differences. But if the housing authorities out there are putting together an RFP, this is an ASHRAE level 2 that you're going to be specifying. And folks who do this ought to know what an ASHRAE level 2, that's the American Society of Heating and Refrigeration Engineers. They have a cookbook of what's included in those levels. And really the submission is required to be an analysis of utilities, some benchmarking, and a discussion of core ECMs. So go ahead to the next one. So this is a slide for folks that want to know what is a level 1 energy audit, level 2 energy audit, level 3. We talk about it internally as, you know, the level 1, there's limited math. It's really about rule of thumb. It's a walkthrough. You're looking at high level quick paybacks, and you're making those recommendations. We want to go beyond that in this to really where we're calibrating items that are in your capital plan with items that have energy paybacks. So we want to go beyond just a list of, hey, yep, building envelope projects are good, let's do those, into which of those have the paybacks we're looking for. So level 2 involves some calculations. We're looking at utility data. We're trying to calibrate, okay, out of the electric bill, here's how much of that monthly bill we think is being spent on lighting. And therefore, this is why we think the lighting project is going to pay back within X amount of years. So if you're talking to a consultant and they're proposing to do a walkthrough survey and point out lighting projects to you, you want to go to the next level, to a level 2, where they're showing you the math of why they think those lights are currently using the amount of electricity they say, and how the payback is going to affect that. Level 3 is what we call an investment grade audit. That's typically appropriate if you're considering doing an ESCO contract down the road, which many of you are. And that really looks at a high level of modeling of the building so that whoever's making that investment has a high level of confidence that yes, for a building with these kind of circumstances located in this location in the country with this many windows towards the sun, we think the project will deliver this amount of savings. And that's important because somebody's making a financial bet on investing in that upgrade. So that's beyond what the HUD standard currently requires. but many of the authorities out there are doing this in preparation for bringing in a what we call an ESCO, or a performance contracting company, somebody who will make the investment with you in new equipment in return for savings over time.
So therein lies a question that we received, which is Housing Authority is in the midst of an EPC, or just starting one, or just starting the energy audit portion of one. How does that relate to the HUD energy audit?
Yeah, great. So great question. So couple thoughts. The EPC, if somebody has done the energy audit that precedes an EPC, so the guy who's going to make the investment in the equipment is going to do an analysis to make sure the paybacks are there before they make a commitment to the Housing Authority. Sometimes the Housing Authority does it, but usually the EPC will do it. That is usually very detailed and good, but not always complete. And you all know who some of the contractors are, and each have the certain things they like to do. You've got a couple companies that really like to do lighting projects, a couple that really like to do HVAC projects. HUD is interested in having a complete picture of the property there. So my advice would be, if you're underway with an EPC, make sure they are going to deliver to you a comprehensive energy audit, including the things that they aren't proposing to replace, because those are things that we may work into the capital plan. So that's the takeaway, really, is make sure, if you've done one a couple years ago, somebody's going to need to look at it and say, okay, did this address all water? And we should say, when we're talking about energy, water is included, water conservation.
Yes.
And we also spend a lot of money heating water in a multifamily situation.
Point number 2 in that conversation, not only the full range of ECMs, but for this particular energy audit, you need to be covering every public housing project in the inventory.
Correct.
When a housing authority does an EPC, it may or may not do every one of the projects in its inventory. So that's another point that needs to be thought of when you're asking yourself the question: is this EPC good enough to satisfy the GPNA requirements and energy audit requirements?
All right, great.
Okay, folks have their hands raised.
So we see that there's a couple folks asking questions here within the WebEx. Bruce, why don't we pull those up here at the end, and we'll make sure we're capturing the ones that are coming here,
Yep.
as well as the questions that are coming in through the HUD
Yep.
PNA portal. So, all right, so I'm going to move quick through the last few things here. Benchmarking is a required part of the tool. So what benchmarking is where we're looking at the utilities and we're aggregating them together. So we're looking at electricity, gas. Some of you have propane and others. We're putting that into a consolidated measure called energy intensity. It's kBTUs per square foot. That allows us to look at your facility and say, against all the other facilities that are in HUD's database or any of the other databases we're using, this is where you rank. Based on that, it's a really good first step to say, you are way below average. If we just take this building up to average, there's big opportunities. Let's pursue those further. If we're in the 90th percentile, then we're saying you're probably in pretty good shape. We should look elsewhere for lower hanging fruit. So that's why benchmarking is important, because it points you in the right direction for the next step. Bill, step 2 is the energy audit, where there's field inspections. We talked about the qualifications of the guys. We're developing ECMs, which are energy conservation measures, and those measures are ranked based on payback. And then step 3 is prioritizing and developing a plan. Similar to after the inspection on the green PNA, the guys come back from the field, they populate the tool, and then at some point that becomes a plan, your capital plan. Here's what's going to be fixed this year. The energy audit also produces a plan that needs to be calibrated with the reserve analysis. It says these are the energy projects we want to do. And those are grouped into core ECMs. Those are the typically recurring items: Energy Star appliances, lighting, low flow water devices, and mechanical heating and cooling systems. Advanced ECMs include renewable energy, solar, geothermal, and certainly one that we see a lot of applicability to in multifamily is solar hot water, because there is a high demand for solar hot water. So this is where we bring it back to this, a couple of the things that you're going to need out of the energy audit to go into the tool. So this is where I usually ask anybody who's seen this form to raise their hand. So go ahead and do that in your office. You can stand up, raise your hand if you've seen this form before. This is HUD's benchmarking tool. It's not mandatory, but this is the one that is best calibrated to multifamily housing, better than EPA's tool. You can see on the left-hand side, we're looking at what the energy usage is, what the pennies per kilowatt are. That's going to be required back in the HUD tool. So if you're looking at an energy audit bill that, say, your EPC guy gave to you, or your prior consultant, and your housing authority trying to figure out if this is going to be the information that you need to go forward, if it doesn't have a page like this that shows the energy usage as well as the unit cost for that, then you're not going to be able to move forward. You're going to need to go back and get somebody to do an energy audit that gives you that level of detail. Next slide. This is the information that you're going to get for a single energy conservation measure. If you're looking at the right-hand side, this is your simple paybacks. Reading left to right, you've got detail on what the item is, what the initial investment is, and the cost savings. And it's simple math to figure out the savings. When we deliver one of these, we like to start with low cost and no cost things up top, and then each page of the report gets into more expensive items. And for us, that the more expensive items probably on the next page would have been the items that we would consider bringing in an ESCO to help finance and implement.
So when you, for example, I'm looking at projected initial investment, does that include such things as utility rebates and things like that?
Yeah, good question. We've seen it a bunch of different ways. When we're doing our initial look like this, we do not include rebates and incentives. We want to look at today's dollars and what's available today for a couple reasons. We don't know when the trigger is going to be pulled on doing these projects.
Right.
Many of those utility matching kind of things and grants and incentives, many of those max out. So it's first come, first serve. When the money's allocated, it's allocated until next year's allocation. So we look at all that stuff as being opportunistic. If you can leverage that on the day that your project gets approved and you're putting it through the system, by all means grab it, but don't count on it as part of what's going to make your project successful or not successful.
Good question, Bill.
Yeah, that was a great. We should put that one in the in the go forward. Yeah. So this is another look at what a single ECM looks like. It kind of has the fields highlighted that we're going to need to go into the tool going forward. And I think that's the last one into.
Yeah.
So now we get back into the tool and show you where that stuff plugs in. And then we'll do Q&A.
All right, we ran our cost projection, and let me show you that. And we've got our toilets here. Now we added toilets to these units. What we're going to do now is add an energy conservation measure based on that toilet deficiency. That really happens here, sustainability. We're going to add a sustainability item, and we'll do that. We'll click over to the units. That's where we found the toilets. We'll double click here and you'll see it starts to populate some of the existing information. Line item ID, here I know toilets are 4721. I will leave that blank. It'll just use the next sequential number. I'm going to call this low flow toilet. And I'm going to call this replacing with low flow.
LF.
Yeah.
Unit of measure.
Now that's each. My index, my data core sources index, of course, it's RX means. I'm going to call this D1234. That's my cost reference. The replacement cost for these are $250.
And what that cost index reference, the RS means in the other books, have line items, and why that's useful is so that next year, when you're updating this, you can look up what that year's cost is for that toilet or the 3-ply roof or what have you. So that'll tell the next guy doing this for you what line item you were referencing.
That's right. All right, my local multiplier I'll leave as 1. I believe it's actually 0.973 for this location. My EUL index is also RS means, and I'm going to say that that's somewhere on the same page.
Local multipliers, you may have mentioned this, come generally out of the cost index books.
They do.
Right.
Right, and then often the housing authority will give us what their historical perspective is on we're typically shaken out at 1.5 times RS means or something, so we take that into consideration as well.
Replacement EUL, let's say they'll last 30 years. I've got quantity 12, which was already populated from the actual amount that I pulled down from the initial number here from the takeoff. Immediate replacement percent 100, and the RUL, I'll say that we should do this now. Scrolling over, got a few more pieces of information to answer here. The utility rate, of course, comes from the benchmarking tool, which we previously showed. Again, if you head over to the HUD website, there are a couple of those that you could download and open up utility water use. It'll give you a basic spreadsheet that you could download, enter your billing information, and it'll show you exactly what the rates are based on what you've collected so far. Oh, nice. So okay.
Got too many things open.
Oh, yeah.
Not liking it.
All right. All right, so I know that this number is 0.05. All right, usage per year right now, it's 480 gallons. Again, your staff, engineers, architects, PNA providers are pretty skilled at estimating that information. We're going to put in more efficient, lower flow, and we'll use a lot less. And we'll calculate the payback, and the payback is 10.41 years. Your incremental cost is here, and once that's showed there, you can project your cost item, and that is complete. If I head back to my, oh, sorry. Did I lose a button here?
Where were you going? Back to control panel?
Yeah, it's gone.
Insert line item.
Oh. All right. All right, and now you see I've got my cost projections here with my original items, and I've also got this green.
Yeah, coincidentally.
It's a good choice of color for the energy item. You see my low flow toilets here. You see my incremental cost is also in that table, and that essentially is how you run the energy item.
Cool.
Okay, do we have any other questions on the WebEx?
Yeah, pull down the chat log.
All righty. Okay, the first question is, does the GPNA tool, the software, have cost indices built into it, or will we have to insert our own?
The answer is no, it doesn't have it built into it. You have to insert your own.
That's correct. That's correct.
I'm learning. I'm educated.
Fast forward through those.
All right.
Some of these we've already responded to.
Okay, from this information discussed so far, it appears that the PHA must inspect all items listed for the sample of units.
If you have them.
If you have...
Right,
Now,
in other words, it inventories items that you might have in a building, for example.
Right.
You don't necessarily have all of those items, so you're only assessing those items that are physically there.
So, but going back to that point, just to make sure I was trying to make before as well, there's 289 components in here. You're not going to use them all.
That's
Right.
right.
And there's going to be some, even with that 289, that we missed, that you
Right.
will have and we don't list. The only reason there's that many there is to just minimize the number that you have to manually enter and add. But, and you only need to find costs for those items you have. You don't have to fill in a cost for an item you won't have or use.
Next question, is there a photo size recommendation for the tool? How many kilobytes should a photo be? I've imported many photos. I've gone from, just over 1 meg, and I've got some in there that are 5 meg. I'm an engineer. The architects on our staff, do a lot of work on the roof. I like to take as detailed a photo as I can, as I may be further away.
Right.
I like to get serial numbers, model numbers, and I use them, again, when I'm doing the research and looking items up and working.
But there's no limit.
Yep.
This is a database, so there's no limit there. The limits are really on the server that you're
That's
working
right.
on.
That's right. Does the PHA need to maintain the tool at their location on their equipment, or would it be perceived that this would be maintained by the contractor? I personally recommend that the PHA keep that themselves.
Well,
Well, I can see it working two ways. If I hire, say, Bill to come in and do my GPNA for me, I tell you in your contract, you've got to use the GPNA tool, you've got to collect all the data on the appropriate systems, and then provide those to me when as a deliverable at the end of the contract.
That's correct.
So while you may be collecting it on data that you're maintaining, you turn that over to the housing authority as a deliverable at the conclusion of the contract. So this way you got both issues dealt with.
Agreed. The housing authority ultimately submits it and then owns it down the road. So.
This question is, what about estimated useful life tables? Those are more difficult to obtain. Who has the best, most accurate tables?
Beauty
Sounds
is
like
in
we're
the-
asking for a recommendation.
Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and we sort of leave it to the professional judgment of the individuals doing this. The federal government can't be in a position of recommending one company over another, so I don't think we can do that.
We probably can't.
Yep.
But the cost indexes do have. I mean, RS Means has
The
one
same
in
ones
a
we
different
mentioned,
volume, right?
So the Means, Swifts, Home Builders has some data. So yeah, the same folks do have life span. And for specialty stuff, there's always the manufacturer. Who if you're working with train units,
They can
all that
price it,
stuff
they
is
can tell you,
available.
right, yeah.
Yes, I mean when it gets to heavy duty. HVAC stuff, we're typically going to the manufacturer and getting data there as well.
And just as with cost, your local experience is also. I mean, if the index says a asphalt roof lasts 25 years, and you're in El Paso, Texas, and your last one only lasted 18 years or whatever, then that's the useful life for you
Absolutely.
in that location.
And that's one of the reasons why you have both the remaining useful life and the estimated useful life. So because things don't wear out at the same rate.
That's right.
So it allows you to make course corrections and adjustments in your software so that the software will actually reflect when things are going to wear out.
Okay, great. Bruce, I've got a couple more questions here. Do you have questions also that?
Yes, couple. I'll make them real quick.
Oh,
Go ahead.
oh no, go ahead. I can.
The PHA has added a new office building. Does it need to be included?
It depends. It's my standard government answer. If the building is attached to the COCC, it's a Central Office Cost Center, it's not included in the P&A because the COCC is responsible for paying for all costs associated with its properties. If that building is attached to an AMP, then the answer is yes.
And of the kind of related questions, am I including in the P&A only those expenses I plan to pay from capital funds?
No. Whatever the cost is, if it's a roof and it costs $10,000, you put the $10,000 in because you want to know what the total costs are. That's the second half of the equation is where do I get the money from? I may get some money from a capital fund, may get some money from tax credits, may get some money from CFFP, et cetera, et cetera. So the source of the funds used is a completely different issue.
Do energy audits have to be done in the same units that I do the P&A inspection in?
No, it's a sampling and a sampling, so definitely not. But it would make it easier if
It would
if
make it
you
easier.
did.
I mean, if you
If
were
you
able to do that, because and that is a question that also comes up that maybe you touch on is some people have gotten the impression that the energy auditor and the P&A provider, if they do a third party, has to be the same person.
Doesn't have to be, but there are certainly efficiencies, and everybody who doesn't do energy audits does PCAs and likewise. But generally, it's folks with building experience looking at stuff and determining what needs replacing and when. So it's a very similar skill set.
Did you have some more, Bill, or do you want me to?
I did.
Okay, go ahead.
So
There's one or two comments about the audio.
there are a couple comments about the audio.
Oh, okay.
There's one. Can we combine the data from multiple tools using a pre-built append function? For example, if we import the PIC data, cost library, and create building/unit sets, we want our architects, civil engineers, and mechanical engineers to do their inspections directly in their own respective tools and combine these into one GPNA prior to submission.
That's a client server version.
Yeah, that's good news.
That is the client server. That's what it does. It's they need to all be linked together in a common system, IT system, but you can use multiple tools and have them all linked together.
So they would need to fire that up on somebody's network and then
Right.
distribute out the tool
Right.
to be reassembled on the same network, if you will, at a housing authority or a consultant's office.
potentially, yes.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
so,
Here,
and that's all available.
PHA, PNA at HUD.gov, and we can send a CD until it's available on the website. It'll be available on the website pretty soon.
Okay.
All right, Bruce, this one I'll paraphrase a little, but it says, does HUD honestly think that any PHA has the staff time or ability to complete the GPNA on its own?
And the
Yes.
answer to that is yes.
Okay.
Is it another item? If you've heard me in some of the other sessions, the GPNA or the PNA function is not new. If you're over 250 units, it's been in the comp grant regs for since those things came out. The Modernization Standards Handbook also had a PNA in it, albeit a simple one. But so the notion of having to do a PNA from a housing authority's perspective, dates back to the beginning days of the program. It's just a matter of form and content, and obviously this is getting more detailed as we get further. But the situation that we find ourselves in as housing authorities and facility managers causes us to have to think about how we do business differently. In some of my classes, I describe this as this is not your mother's and father's public housing program. It's a completely different animal. Back in the olden days, we had the capital funds, the operating funds, and one big budget for the entire agency, and we just made everything work. Now we have asset management, we have PHAs, we have PHAs physical, now we have the GPNA, we have asset-based management. All of that, we have appropriations, good, bad, or indifferent, no judgment, they are what they are. So because of that, because of the backlog, this is not your mother's and father's public housing program. You have to think about it differently. You have to think about data sources. You have to think about money sources. And so, yes, we're going to have to do business a little bit differently.
Yeah.
And if you're going to be a property manager, whether you're in the public housing program or elsewhere, you're going to be looking at the physical condition of the property. And you're looking at it long term in terms of being a going concern for the next 10 to 15 to 20 years.
Great.
Dan. That's a mouthful.
Yeah.
All right, this is the
I was
last
gonna
one.
I was gonna say that
Do you have an opinion on that?
what we're
How
seeing
you
is
feel?
the smaller there's certainly some authorities that are small and
Yes.
have simple building set that
And a staff that understands property.
well, that's the plus minus on this is that the smaller authority, relatively simple exercise to do this, utility bills on one building, but they don't have a deep staff of engineers and architects. Bigger authorities do have a deeper bench, but they've got other projects going on, and we're seeing a couple that are in the very large list that are trying to do this in-house, and we've seen some folks on the smaller side that are doing it in-house. So. I mean, it is doable, but you do have to have the staff available to do
And I
it.
don't think this is a long shot from sort of the way we've been doing business, because most housing authorities, even the small housing authorities, have hired architects to do their modernization, their annual and 5-year plans to do assessments to be able to figure out what goes in there. This is just the next level up. So the visual here, it looks like it's more complicated, but as I've suggested on several occasions, this isn't rocket science. And I think it's a doable thing.
Great. That was my last question.
That was your
That was
last
your last-
question?
do you have any more
And
questions?
We're just about at our time. Oh, my goodness, right. Let me check really quickly. When will the rule be final? Take data uploads, add uploads. Yeah, so there were some questions about, well, what happens with PIC data over time through the annual updating process? And so that may be a concern that some people have. HUD has recognized that over time, that PIC data or the data is going to become mushier in that kind of interim period between every 5 years when the whole PNA is done. We've accepted that, have that tolerance. We don't think it's going to be statistically significant as long as we start off with a relatively
Certain.
sound PIC,
Yeah.
sound data in the first run. So the answer to the question is no. The annual updates are not going to be revalidated against PIC at that time. So it's just this kind of one-time thing at the submission.
Okay, I think that's about it for today. We've gone through all of the PowerPoint presentations and we've answered all of the questions. So until we meet again.
One other last point, there is a evaluation form at the end of the slides. So there is a place to go to provide your evaluation, your feedback to us. We will be continuing training in another cycle later on in the year, and so this feedback would be very helpful for us in designing future training. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank-